What's up guys, Excalibur here and welcome back to Star Ocean Anamnesis, and also welcome back to the most amazing thing on the planet, another character guide, and this time we're going to be taking a look at Fiore, so let's get started. Fiore is our first real support Invoker and a great asset to any Invoker party. Her first talent, Signaturge's Pride, increases her own int by 25%. 25% is a pretty big increase added onto her already amazing int stat, creates a whopping 3400 int, which that allows her to do a lot of damage. Then her second talent, Inherited Symbology, causes no flinching during symbol invocation for the entire party and increases the entire party's int stat by 20%. As far as characters go, Fiore is the first one that causes no flinching during symbol invocation. There are weapons that give characters that ability, but Fiore is the only character that can do that right now, and the int plus 20% also makes spellcasters do a lot more damage, so overall, this kind of makes Fiore really good in spellcaster parties. Her third talent, Infinite Curiosity, increases the attack or int damage dealt by 15% when the skill chain is at 3 or more for the entire party. Now this talent is mostly going to benefit Invokers because obviously you'll be running Fiore in an Invoker based party. But unfortunately, most Invokers kind of have a bit of trouble getting to anything above a 3 skill chain because of their high AP costs. So Fiore doesn't have any trouble with that, by the way. So they won't really benefit from that. Regardless, 15% extra in damage on their, basically their strongest attack, that's a lot of extra damage. And her last talent, Symbology of Viewing, reduces AP cost by 60% when the skill chain is at 3 or more and reduces her own symbol invoking time by 30%. So we have the standard cast time reduction, and then we also have AP cost minus 60, which is kind of what sets Fiore apart, and you'll see that with one of her battle skills when you start playing as her. She can spam the ever-loving hell out of it, and that makes her do a lot of damage. Speaking of her battle skills, her first skill, Shadow Needles, unleash needles composed of concentrated darkness. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 240%. It does 5 hits, has a dark element, and it costs 23 AP. This is a skill that you're going to become very familiar with because it's kind of her best attack. It's fast, doesn't cost a lot of AP, and it can do damage. And then up next we have Ice Needles. Manifest myriad icicles, occasionally freezes foes. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 250%. It does 9 hits, has an ice element, and it costs 24 AP. This is basically the ice version of Shadow Needles, except Shadow Needles spawn on top of the target, whereas these spawn next to Fiore, so it might be a little harder to hit these, but it's still good for using as filler in your combo. And then up next we have Absolute Zero. Freeze. Turn an area to ice. Occasionally freezes foes. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 550%. It does 9 hits, has an ice element, and it costs 38 AP. Now this attack can do a lot of damage, but it kind of gets outclassed by all of her other attacks. I guess if you're fighting a boss weak to ice, you could use this, but then again, you could also just use Ice Needles, which would probably do more damage, so you don't really have a reason to use this. And then we have Shadowy Extinction. Enclose your foe in a dome of dark matter and detonate it. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 670%. It does 2 hits, has a dark element, and it costs 42 AP. This is an AoE attack that you mostly use for, crowd control. I guess that's what you use AoE attacks for. But I guess you could use it as a combo finisher. Then again, she also has the Shadow Needles, like I've been saying. That's kind of the attack that you want to use for damage. So Shadowy Extinction is mostly for when you're fighting multiple enemies. And then lastly we have her rush, Final Dystopia. Darkness envelops all, unleashing death and destruction upon your foe. Its power is determined by multiplying int by 3500%. It has a dark element, and as a post-rush buff, it decreases the defense of all enemies by 40% for 20 seconds. Even though the rush multiplier is kind of on the low end, Fiore has a really good int stat to compensate, so this could definitely be used as a rush finisher depending on the other characters that are in the party. But I would rate this somewhere at the top. It can definitely do a lot of damage. Now unfortunately, as a post-rush buff, it doesn't really do much, considering that defense minus 40% is not that big of a damage increase for us, but it's certainly a rare buff. You don't run the risk of it overlapping with anything else. So it could have been better, but it's still decent. Alright, with that out of the way, let's move on to weapons. And Fiore luckily doesn't need many weapons. In fact, she only needs one weapon, as a mostly dark-based Invoker. But first, let's take a look at the free alternative. We have the Blue Star gadget, which you can get from the Orb Exchange coin shop. This has a 500 int stat when it's max limit break. I almost said attack, but that doesn't sound too great. But that first factor, int plus 15%, makes up for the lower int stat it has compared to gacha weapons. Second factor, damage taken minus 10%. Gives you some more survivability, and when it's max limit broken, you unlock the last factor, which is a 10% HP recovery every 3 seconds, which is, that's actually a pretty big recovery, so this gives some good survivability, and it can give you a nice int bonus too. So overall, it's pretty decent. But if you feel like tempting fate and rolling the gacha, you have the choice of 2 weapons actually. The Black Geared Globe is the one that's on raid up right now, and you can get it. It has a 962 int stat at level 20, and it increases dark damage dealt by 40%, also increases damage dealt to divinities. It gives you a 10% extra crit hit chance and 10% crit hit damage, and the last factor is unlocked at Limit Break 5. And it gives you an 80% chance of surviving a lethal attack at 20% HP or more. This weapon can make Fiore's damage skyrocket, so if you're planning on maining Fiore, you definitely have to pick this up. But there's also the Black Seed Watermelon Orb, which is also in the gacha, and that one increases dark damage dealt by 30%, so it's a little weaker than this, but if you have that one, if you happen to have that one, you could also use that one. And then moving on to the accessory I recommend you use. Fiore can actually use a bunch of different accessories, but the one I like to use is the Jinx Necklace, which increases rush combo damage by 5%, and you could have obtained this from the Pumpkin Crypt Vine event, which was back during Halloween, unfortunately. It just increases Fiore's damage, that's all it's really here for, and if you don't have the guts on your gacha weapon, you always have a guts on this, so there we go. Okay, and then we have the battle skill setup. First of all, I recommend Shadowy Extinction, because it can do a lot of damage in certain situations. You can use it for crowd control against smaller groups of enemies, and you need 3 battle skills, so you might as well pick this one. And then secondly, I recommend Ice Needles, because again, you need 3 skills, and it's better than Absolute Zero Freeze. And plus, you can use this as filler in your combos because it doesn't cost that much AP, so you can use it to reach that 300% cancel bonus. And then lastly, obviously, I'm going to recommend Shadow Needles because of how strong it is when paired with Fiore. It does a lot of damage, comes out quickly, and it can hit pretty much anything. So with this setup, we can create a combo that looks like this: a normal attack into a charge assaulted Shadow Needles, into Ice Needles, into as many Shadow Needles as you can fit, which is going to be a lot, considering that she reduces her AP cost by 60%. In case you don't know, whenever you're playing as Invokers, you should always charge assault the first skill in your combo because that greatly speeds up its casting time. It takes quite a while to deplete all of your AP with this combo, considering that the Shadow Needles at the end only cost 9 AP, so you're gonna be hitting that button for a while. But it does a lot of damage. You could also swap out Shadow Needles for Shadowy Extinction if the situation calls for it. Now on to a party. This time I created a small Invoker-based party, considering that's what Fiore is good at. So, first up, we have FaZe. FaZe buffs the party's single target damage by 30%, he increases their stun chance by 15%, and he also does a lot of damage himself. FaZe mostly stands out because of his stun lock potential, which he can share with Fiore, but he also synergizes quite well with Fiore, considering that Fiore buffs basically all of FaZe's attacks, and they're both Dark Element Invokers, so you can actually use both of them against a boss that's weak to Dark. Then to support both Fiore and FaZe, up next we have Aurelia, who increases the party's standing AP recovery by 50%, which is great for Invokers. She also casts Brute Enlightenment, which increases their int by 25%, and she also gives the entire party a regen of 5% every 3 seconds. So the reason why Aurelia is here instead of Reyna is because Aurelia's standing AP recovery actually helps Invokers out a lot, and Brute Enlightenment is a little better damage-wise when it comes to Angel Feather, which buffs everything by 20%. Brute Enlightenment is 25%. And the HP regen, the standard HP regen, is also really good for surviving. And then to fill our last party slot, I chose Summer Miki. She's really rare in multiplayer, but I think she works kind of well in this party. So she increases damage by 25% for the entire party. She gives every ally that's standing in front of the enemy a 70% chance of surviving a lethal attack at 20% HP or more, and whenever somebody's standing behind the enemy, they get a 20% increased chance of doing crits. And post-rush, she gives a 10% chance of doing crits and 40% extra crit damage for the entire party for 20 seconds. That's a lot she can do, and it's very positional based. Now, Miki's main objective here is to play tank. Seeing as how we don't have a defender with us, we kind of need the sharpshooter to take the heat. So Miki is going to take the enemy's attention, and then everybody else gets an increased crit rate, and then Fiore and FaZe can do their damage while Relia keeps up the buffing. I think this will work pretty well. Or you could just go with Fiore and 3 phases, that also works. So to summarize, Fiore is our first real Invoker buffer. She increases the int of the entire party, she increases their int damage, and she causes no flinching during casting. If you stick her into your Invoker party, you're going to see a huge increase in performance. But just because she is a good buffer doesn't mean that she can't do a lot of damage. She's got a really good int stat, as well as some good offensively based talents like the 60% AP cost reduction and the cast time reduction at skill chain 3. So as soon as you reach that point in your skill chain, her damage is going to skyrocket. Although, you might get carpal tunnel from the amount of times you have to hit that damn Shadow Needles button. And that's it for my Fiore guide, and now, I leave you all with this.
I-S titties, I-S titties.